I'm Joseph Bailey, live in New York City. By day, I am in biotech and healthcare marketing, and by night, finding ways to give back, whether it's through COVID-19 relief in Los Angeles or it's anti-racism groups that we're forming around the country.
I would like to start by asking you, what do you think people's first impression of you is outside of that intro?
You know what? He's someone who just gives a shit about me. Like, he cares about me so much.
Even in your intro, I mean, you talk about being an advocate for a couple of different groups. So let's talk about that.
Sure. So both of the groups that I have been working with came about super organically via friendships. The one thing that is very important for me in my everyday life that has certainly transitioned into my career is getting to know someone's story. And I say that because there are so many people, myself included, that have experienced some form of trauma in their childhood or trauma in their adult life or some form of amazing accomplishment in their childhood or amazing accomplishment in their adult life that impacts them and how they make decisions. It's not always the inputs of how you were raised, it's the inputs of the world around you, it's the inputs of the world you're currently in. There's so many things that inform how you make a decision. And so that is a very long-winded way of getting to it. Comes down to character for me. And so both of the people that I've been working with on these initiatives are people that have just fantastic character. My girlfriend was told, hey, can you have to also stay home, close your restaurants tomorrow. That being said, there's a ton of food that's sitting in their kitchens, right? And she frames it up so much better than I will, but I will take her word. So thank her for this. They had a clean kitchen. They had cars that could drive. They had food in their kitchens that were not going to be, raising revenue anymore from an income perspective for them because it would go bad. Like, you can't keep it sitting there for months. And we don't know how long we're going to be in this. And so she and her husband started taking recommendations on who in the community they could be delivering food to, whether like marginalized folks, those who couldn't go out and shop for themselves, so on and so forth. And it started with that. And she was taking like nominations on her Instagram via the community. And then there was, from there, one day she and her husband had decided to deliver food to frontline workers. And it was we found a way to raise money to give back to the front lines and deliver them food as we're going through this pandemic that we now don't know how long it's going to last. And also, like, it could keep your restaurant team employed as best we possibly could. But while all of that was happening, we were having conversations around COVID and the relief efforts and the things that we were doing. In parallel, George Floyd's life was taken amongst the many other lives that had been taken at the hands of police brutality against people of color, specifically Black people in this country. And so I know that Marissa and I were having a great dialogue and discourse about going out and joining, the protests that were happening. I myself was having conversations with my friends about going out and joining the protests that were happening and being a part of the movement and the rallies that were occurring. And someone said to me, one of my friends said to me, you're just going out and it's just a super spreader event. Why are you doing that? And I said back to the person, I've had to march as a gay man in this country. I've had to march for my equality. And when I've been out there marching, I've been out there marching with people who weren't you. Like, you who are my friend never came and stood next to me while I was out marching for marriage equality. You who came and stood next to me were not standing next to me at the Women's March. You who were my friend are now not standing next to me at the Black Lives Matter marches and the marches for reform in how the police treat people of color. And you don't understand the facts and figures against Black trans women in this country. you don't know anything about our communities or even your own community because you haven't come out to learn. You haven't educated yourself. And because you weren't standing next to me, but a stranger was, you better believe that I sure as hell am going to go out and stand next to them in the street. And that is 150% how I have lived. Like the reason why I love living in New York City is I roll out of my front door into a cause every day and if I can stand behind it and I support it for sure. Jen started a group called Racism Has No Home Here. Racism Has No Home Here began with signs that she distributed in America for a march for George Floyd and the lives lost. And then from there, we are now in 42 of 50 states with our signs, with the idea that when you place a sign on a front door or in the ground in front of your house or in the window of a small business, you are signaling that you are a safe place, and you're ultimately like putting a stake in the ground that you don't stand for racism and that you are an anti-racist. And we are now taking that group up a level, and we are working to become a 501(c). We're in the final stages of our approval for that. And underneath that nonprofit banner, we aim to create educational resources, starting under the banner of Racism Has No Home Here, for children K through 12, and then the subsections within K through 12, on how they can become anti-racist, on how if they live in a home that there is a rhetoric around racism, they can have conversations with their parents to maybe change what that rhetoric is. And then the goal is from there to be able to expand it to be homophobia has no home here, transphobia has no home here. And every Tuesday night, we're getting to have these amazing dialogues around the type of content that we need. It's just so meaningful to be able to do something to in some small way make it easier for the next generation. I think about my future, and I think about the fact that I know that by 40, if I'm still single, I'd like to have a child on my own. High likelihood that if I go through adoption, I will have a child of can be for the fights that are to come, because I know that that's education that I, as a male who is white, who has a form of privilege, didn't have when it came to my coming out story or my homosexuality. And so it's super important, and we are a fantastic consortium of people that are building to do it. And so both of these things, they make you feel, it makes them feel good, the people that you're helping, it allows you to feel good. And in the middle of the pandemic, like that feeling is essential right now. And so it's been fantastic to get to like do these two things and work with really cool people and just like maybe make some form of a difference, whether it's like big or small. But yeah, that's it. Those are the things that are fun and different and cool.
They're incredibly touching because, like you said, you've touched on so many things, and I have so many thoughts swirling in my head right now. And I want to talk about all of them.
I'm an open book, so hit me with whatever it is you have.
No, it's all fantastic, and it's all just expanding on things that you said. First, I want to point out that you took two huge things that happened in 2020 and are, not to use some super cliche thing, but making lemons out of lemonade. But I say all the time in doing this show that community became even more important than I thought it would be when I started this,
Yeah.
once the pandemic hit. And so the fact that you have found two incredible ways to give back to communities and to build a community at the same time.
And I just want to, Leslie, I just want to like for a second clarify. It was really like Jen for Racism Has No Home Here and Marissa for You Give, We Cook, They Eat, which I probably should have named them sooner. So You Give, We Cook, They Eat is the platform for the COVID-19 relief recovery. Racism Has No Home Here is the anti-racism group. It was really them who started it, but to be able to get involved and to help, to your point, like for sure. So I don't want to take all the credit.
No, I completely understand that you're just participating in these things, but the fact is you got up and did something.
Yeah, it was really
and good. You saw that people were doing things, and you didn't just swipe up and go, that's cool, that's neat. You said, hold please, I want to be involved. this means something to me. You mentioned something in, talking about the way that you want people to see you, that that you care about them, that you do care about their story.
Yeah.
Um, I care about stories like so much. I started a YouTube channel, but
Yes,
I,
that's how we got
I
here. Kyle was like, "You need to meet Leslie. This is going to be great." And I was like, "Yes, I love it. Let's do it."
but it's so important to get that story so that you can get that understanding, and even then have educational conversations or intelligent conversations with other people about things they may not know about, or they may be speaking out of turn about, but you're like, I've actually heard a story about that, or I've actually met a person that I can speak to intelligently now about what you're talking about. So I think that there's something to be said for how you think, which is obviously similar to how I think, because here I am hearing your story.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
How do you feel about listening and the impact listening can have on the way you approach situations and approach people? And how much do you think you learn out of listening to someone and their story?
So listening is super important, and I think that a lot of people listen to respond. They don't actually listen to process information. So there are times in life, but then especially during these interviews, where I'm listening so intently, the person stops talking and there's this long pause. And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm supposed to say something. But it's because I'm processing all of that and I'm figuring out what the best question to ask is so that I can keep the conversation going, and to learn more. Because I do feel like we get way more when we actually listen than when we just, I hear you. I heard you speaking. I didn't absorb any of it, but I heard your mouth moving. And so, yeah, listening is key. And I think there's something that I say sometimes, which is mouth shut, ears open.
I love that. Mine's the world around you.
See, I love it. You said that it's not all about what you're taught at home. There is your sense of community, because, like you said, if you're in a house where racism lives and you don't want that for yourself, how do you have the conversations outside of that? How do you empower yourself to not be part of your environment? And how do you get comfortable with knowing that it's okay to not be that way, which it's wrong to be that way?
Right. Well, and and there are very loose similarities to your point that you're making around, like my coming out story. Um, it is, if you are living in a home that is full of racism and you don't believe in it, you're an anti-racist. It is very, I'm sure, stifling and hard to have that conversation. And I think about my coming out process and the fact that it took me 10 years from point A, of like the point A being the first conversation, to point B of telling the last person. It took me 10 years to muster up that conversation. And what I was not doing a good job of was I was living the world around me here, but I had such a thought in my head around my dad specifically and what I thought his reaction would be. I was always quick to respond because I needed to have an answer in order to feel good enough in his presence. I just didn't take the time to sit back and listen. And now that we're having the conversation like this, like in this manner, I'm like, oh my God, I never did that. Like I never sat back and just took stock of him and where he was. And that's a conversation we've had recently. We had to have a really difficult conversation recently because of my going through therapy and my coming to the realization of some of the things that maybe I didn't agree with as it related to his behaviors growing up as a kid. And after two very difficult conversations, conversation 3 was, let's find ways that we can be together now and get to know each other after having had these conversations so that we can advance the plot. And it's because I overall, outside of those situations where I felt pain, he has changed and I need to accept him for that. And so it's very interesting when we frame it up like that. Like, I just wasn't listening. I wasn't watching. I wasn't being an observer in my life to understand the inputs I was just so focused on those things. So it's just really interesting when you put it like that.
You talked about really taking a moment and listening, and you talked about the 10-year span it took you to come out.
Mhm.
You said you told the first person and you told the last person. Who was
Yes.
the first person and who was the last person?
The first, the first, I was with the, I was with two of the first people I told last night. I would say it wasn't necessarily I did everything very analytically when it came to coming out. So I told my college friends first because I had known them the least amount of time. And coming to the realization you're gay, growing up in a Catholic household, for everyone, I think is super difficult. For me, it was difficult. I mean, maybe it's easier for some, but for me, it was difficult. Mainly because I always thought when I was going through puberty and having attractions towards men, it was dirty, it was wrong, and this is like the devil tempting you. And now I need to make the decision that I'm straight. I actually spent the summer during Pride doing a series on my coming out stories that I put onto my Instagram and also onto Facebook. And one of the teachers at my high school who teaches religion said to me, I never thought about the fact that when I teach religion, that may be someone's takeaway. Knowing how I viewed myself and that I was about to start on this journey, I decided go with the people you've known the least because if they walk away, it's almost a no harm, no foul. So the first two people I told were my friends, Matt and Jenny. I sent them an email and told them, and they basically called me both right after. We're like, we're aware. And then my college roommate will tell you that my exact words to him were, so I want you to know I've been dating dudes. Like I tried to make it Fleischman Kincaid reading level 3 for the heterosexual man in the room. Like I've been dating dudes. So that they were the first people that I told. They were fantastic. And then the last person that I told was my dad. And I only had the confidence to do it because I had a relationship with someone who was or is still married um, to a woman. And there was everything about our relationship was great because it taught me all the things that I deserve, but it also began to show me all the things I didn't. Admittedly, in relationships after that one, I continued to go for the things that I didn't deserve because I never found myself worthy enough. And I'm getting there through therapy to go for the things that I know I deserve now. Um, but I was on vacation in Mexico. I was on the phone with him pulling into the resort before my vacation like officially started. And then 2 days later, I noticed there was like an unfollow on Instagram and a few other things. I was like, what's happening here? And then I checked my email, and there was a very long email about how something was said to him at home that day, and he could no longer do this. And he never meant to con me into believing that he loved me. And I was like, all of these amazing things, but like, he'll never be what I need him to be, which were all things that I knew. But at that point, he had said things to me like that he loved me and so on and so forth. That like you once those things come out of the box, you can't take them back. Um, and so I just had this moment where I was basically like, uh, I have to do this. It's time because the only thing that holds me back from having a fulfilling relationship and choosing relationships that have at minimum end dates on them, at maximum a lot of toxicity in them, is the fact that I haven't told my dad. So I'm continuing to live my life in every space except for my home when I'm in my parents' house, even though my mom knew, as in the closet. And so I just need to end it. And so I called my mom and said, we're doing it tomorrow after work. I will FaceTime you, have dad be ready. Like, you don't have to tell him what it's about, but just, I need to talk to him. Like I have to get it done. Whole time leading up to it, my mom basically was saying to me, Joe, I don't understand why you're so worried. And it's again because of that fact, like I had not taken stock of the man that I was raised by to notice that the man that he is today is not the man that he was. And so, it was sunset-ish in Punta Mita where I was staying. and I was sitting on the balcony and I FaceTimed them. I couldn't look at the camera. Like I was looking off into space at the ocean beyond the camera. And I just said, I'm gay. And he said, hey, can you look at the camera? And I did. And he said, did you murder anyone? I said, no. He said, have you robbed anyone or are you a drug addict? And I said, no. And he said, even if you were either of those things, any of those things, I may not like the person that you've become, but I'll always love you. And it was just, I mean, I spent the next 3 days sobbing my eyes out. It was like this watershed moment of like, oh my, so I'm not out of the will. Like I'm allowed to come home. I don't, all of the fear that I built up is gone. And so that was the last person that I told. The one thing that I will say that I think is very important as it relates to coming out stories or even anyone's stories is just because I've told that last person that knows me now, there are still people that will enter my life or that are in my life. You have to be prepared to have those conversations with people who will then need to come to an understanding about your sexuality. But you have to think about how does your coming out story continue? Like it's almost like coming out 2.0. How do you keep the conversation going in a way that is no longer about you coming to terms with and living your truth, but helping people understand that you've been living your truth and you're going to continue to live it in the ways that make you happy and in ways that you're not necessarily trying to make them uncomfortable, but that may not necessarily be something they can understand given age or whatever it may be. And it's a get on board with it or don't. So I think that's the important part is like, yes, I told the last person in my life that knew me then about it, but now it's about how do you prepare those that you're getting to know in a different way about your life. It's something I think about a lot. It doesn't take up every aspect of my day, but it takes up enough of it.
I just think you should feel empowered every day to be you and to live
Every
your
day I take pen out of peanuts. That I'm empowered to be me every day. I roll in a dust cloud and I roll out in a dust cloud.
and that's okay. And that is
great.
totally okay.
I love it. Because normally in that dust cloud, I joke that if you can't find me, you can't fire me. So it's fine. That's how I'm always in the dust cloud.
Your journey is incredible. And I don't want to discount it by asking a different question that changes the subject, but I do want to acknowledge it and say that the minute you said that you told your roommates first, I knew in my head it was because you had known them the least amount of time is what first came to my thought. That thought process of, I don't have enough invested here to where if it didn't exist anymore, it would severely impact me or hurt me. So I'm going to try out this narrative where there's less risk.
And I will say, the funny thing is, that was the talk track I told myself in my head. In the pandemic, I spend every Sunday with two of my college best friends and one of their wives who has become another one of my best friends. So it's just so funny because it was a talk track I told myself in my head, I think, to make it easier to start that process. In reality, I probably would have been devastated and hurt for certain. I would have used it as like a learning lesson for definite, but that was definitely a talk track I told myself to make it.
But it wasn't even true, right? It was what you needed to be okay with what was about to happen in your mind, right? It was, here's how I think this is going to go. And if it goes that way, I don't care. And then you go through it and you realize, okay, that was nothing like I thought it was going to be. It's much more of an open and welcoming space. And I'm really glad that you're still here because I do hurt you and I didn't want you to leave my side. And here you are way later with those people still to this day. So it shows you that you, as Joseph Bailey, are what matters. It's the winning personality takes the cake. And the causes that you get behind are a part of what you stand for as a human being. And understanding that your journey has brought you to those causes to want to be a voice for these communities that are slighted, that are not given what they deserve because people don't believe that that's proper, which is abhorrent to me as well. So, yeah.
It's amazing when you take stock of the amount of marginalized communities that there are in the world, in this country, in this city, in this neighborhood, probably in this apartment building. It boggles my mind. And there's part of me that thinks maybe that, like, it makes me feel like I'm a little bit naive. Do you know what I mean? Like, where I have this, and maybe it's part of my privilege, right? As a white man in this country, like maybe I'm naive to it in some days, or when I say it out loud, it sounds like a very naive point of view. It's more of it sometimes feels like we're all shouting into the wind. And how can we take the wind that we're shouting into and have it carry and amplify our voices versus drown them out?
And I'll speak on to that. How can you take that voice in the wind and have it lift the people up and carry everyone forward?
Yes.
Instead of having you hold on to whatever the nearest thing is that keeps you in your narrative. Like, how can that wind blow a new narrative and a new sense of community and a new sense of acceptance to people as human beings, not as these little specks, like you said, of the marginalization. And I think that we need that. And I'm really glad that you're working with the groups that you're working with. There are people that I work with also to help change the narrative. And it's something that's very important to me too. Not to change the subject. Again, we have been talking for so long and we could keep talking forever. But what is something that would surprise people to know about you?
Probably the most surprising thing for people to learn about me is that underneath the smile and the self-deprecation and the humor that I use to mask everything, is a truly sensitive person who just wants to do what's I just want to do the best I possibly can to help us do the best we possibly can. And it's probably not that surprising, but I think it is because sometimes people just take things at face value and they don't get to know you on that level deeper. So they just automatically assume that you're just some, like, oh my gosh, he's always so funny. He's such a jokester at the office. Like, look at him. He's always like, whatever. But like, yeah, I'm that, because I'm also going to, if you cross me, I'm going to cut you later because I need to, because I need something done, right? Like, I'm not, there's so many facets to a person. I think the one facet that gets most overlooked for me is my sensitivity. And so that I would say is probably the most surprising, and my overarching giant heart that I have. The other thing that's probably most surprising to people, I have a photographic memory.
You have definitely been nothing short of surprising and nothing short of fun and energetic and heartwarming and kind and informative and passionate and beautiful. And you're
I feel the same way about you. This is
oh bleh. I'm I'm just in awe of you. I love doing these interviews and I've loved this conversation, and I hate that we have to close it out. And I hate that I have to ask you this next question because it means it's the end of our conversation for this interview, but we will do a follow-up. We will find out how you're doing and life will be grand again. But for now, as you move about the world or stay at home in your crew neck and your jeans, whatever is happening for you.
yeah.
if if you have the opportunity, whether it's in the world or on a Zoom call, to just hold up a sign and tell people one thing about Joseph Bailey, what is it you would want them to know?
I love you. Is that cheesy? That's like the first thing I came up with was like, I care about you.